Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Struggle, Hollow Crest Wolfpack Book 2, by C.C. Masters. Narrated by Troy Duran and Heather Costa. Prologue. Baracus. I kept my breathing shallow as I walked through the darkness to the prearranged meeting place. Ever since I was shot a couple of weeks ago, I was unable to take a deep breath. The bullet had pierced my lung and left me drowning in my own blood. I had laid unconscious for days while my body healed, but I hadn't been restored quite right. The injury had left me unable to walk faster than the ambling pace of an old man. It had also left me unable to fight or run with my pack. I had awoken from my healing sleep to find my pack in shambles, and the Stone Creek pack sniffing around our territory. Losing the most powerful wolves in my pack had left us open for attack, and my weakness was the final nail in our coffin. My own pack had turned on me and let the alpha of the Stone Creek wolf pack waltz right into our territory. I snarled when I thought about how I had been pushed aside and forced to pledge my loyalty to another alpha if I wanted to keep my life. My former collection of females now turned down their noses at me, unwilling to slake my needs without the promise of the favor of the packmaster. My home was taken over by wolves from Stone Creek, and I was banished to the outskirts of our territory in what could best be described as a shack. Rage filled me at the memory of the weakest wolves in the pack, giving me looks of pity as they dropped off a collection of my personal belongings. Our new alpha didn't want his home tainted by the remnants of the old regime. I looked up at the stars in the night sky and tried to get my temper under control. The urge to shift so I could run and hunt was almost too much to resist, but my deformed and dysfunctional lung affected me even in my wolf form. I was unable to find peace in any form. Footsteps crunched in the gravel as my contact walked up the driveway to my pitiful new home. "Looks like you've had quite the reversal of fortune, Baracus." His mocking voice carried through the night, and I clenched my jaw in an effort not to respond. I wouldn't be able to back up my words with action. He would easily have my face pressed into the dirt, and my humiliation would be even worse. "Do you have the information?" I spat out. "I do," he said thoughtfully as he looked me over. "But my price has increased since we last spoke." I cursed at him. This asshole was going to try to extort me now? He smiled as if he found my anger amusing. "I need a little extra to ease my guilt over turning a sweet little girl over to you." "That little bitch is anything but sweet," I snarled. "She destroyed this entire pack, ruined my life. She's going to pay." He shook his head in false sadness. "And that's why I need extra. 20% should do it." I stared at him in disbelief. "That's ridiculous." He shrugged and waved a folder. "If you don't want this." I sucked in a breath to curse him out again, but it was too much for my lung. I wheezed as it seized up, and I couldn't take in enough air. He watched with a raised eyebrow while I choked and struggled to breathe. My anger towards him was only outweighed by my hatred for Lori and need for revenge. When I finally caught my breath, I nodded in agreement. "It's in the house." He followed my slow pace back into the house, but looked derisively at the piece of shit couch in my living room when I offered him a seat. "Suit yourself," I growled as I went into the tiny box of a room that passed for a bedroom. Stone Creek had seized all the pack assets, including bank accounts, but I'd always kept some money hidden in case of an attempted coup. I pulled out more cash than I wanted to part with, but if it got my hand around that little bitch's throat, then it was well worth it.
Chapter 1. Lori. I looked nervously at Cannon as we walked up to our new school. He reached for my hand with a reassuring smile, and I gave it to him gratefully. Cannon was tall, lean, and super smart. His sandy brown hair, hazel eyes, and fit form were just the attractive packaging that hid the sweet genius inside. The feel of Cannon's hand in mine eased some of my anxiety from what we were about to face today. The school was small enough that there would be no hiding in the crowd for us. Everyone knew each other here. Cannon and I had registered for our classes last week and had received a tour of the school. I had been a little surprised that it had gone so smoothly. No one had questioned the fake identification or the transcripts that the lamia had provided for me. It seemed almost too easy. I kept waiting for the charade to fail and someone to call us out on our lies. I followed Cannon through the crowded hallway towards the senior lockers. One perk of being a senior was that we got the luxury version of lockers. They were twice the size of the freshman lockers and on the newer side. Our linked hands got a few curious glances, but most people were too busy greeting their old friends to care about two new students passing by them. I hoped that would last and Cannon and I would be left in peace. We passed by Taylor, but she carefully avoided my eyes as she laughed at something one of her friends said. Whatever. It hurt a little that she was going to pretend she had never met me before in her life, but I would rather be left alone than have to deal with drama. If she didn't want to talk, then it was fine with me. I had thought that Taylor and I had become friends over the summer while we worked together at her uncle's ice cream shop, but that had quickly changed on my last day. Her uncle, Roger Raven, had attempted to sexually assault me. I had fought him off when Taylor had walked in. She made it clear that she would protect her uncle in an attempt to salvage the reputation of her family, despite knowing the truth about him. Taylor was a pretty blonde that seemed to be popular with the other students, so I doubt I would be able to make friends easily if she hated me. Cannon let go of my hand as we reached my locker. You okay? I shrugged and spun the lock to put in my combination. Just nervous. I wish we had more classes together. Cannon and I were taking AP Calculus and a history class together, but we were going to be separated for the rest of our classes. I wasn't brave enough to try AP Physics or the computer programming class he was in, and he felt the same about fourth-year French and creative writing. We had also gotten stuck with different homerooms and gym classes. It'll be okay, he assured me. We just have to make it to lunch. I gave him a smile. Don't be late to homeroom. He glanced around to make sure no one was watching us before placing a quick kiss on my forehead. We had already been warned that PDA between students was frowned upon here. The warning bell rang to let us know that we only had 2 minutes to get to our homerooms, and Cannon hurried down the hall to his locker. I grabbed the textbook and notebook that I would need for my first class of the day and shoved my backpack into the locker. This school was full of rules, and they didn't allow students to bring backpacks to class for safety reasons. That would have been completely impractical at my last school, but this one was so small that I would be able to walk to my locker between each class. I sighed and picked up my speed to get to my homeroom. There were only 12 classrooms on the first floor, and they were clearly numbered, so I had no problem getting there before the bell rang. I stood in front of the classroom for a moment to evaluate the situation. Most of the seats were already full with students talking loudly about what they did over summer break. The back had been the first to fill, so the only empty desks were ones in the first 2 rows. I decided that a desk in the second row off to the left side of the classroom looked safe, so I made my way over. Before I could even set my books down on top of the desk, a blonde girl put her hand out to stop me. "Sorry," she said snidely. "This seat's saved." Her brunette friend giggled, and they both stared as I let out a breath of frustration. They ran their eyes over my thrift shop clothes and sneered at my braided hair and bare face. I knew that I wasn't dressed like them, but why did girls have to be so petty? Instead of being difficult and making new enemies, I just gave them a smile and walked away. There were now only 2 desks left in the front center of the room, so I sighed in resignation and sat in one of them. I hated the feeling of having an entire room of students at my back where I couldn't see them. I could hear whispers behind me, but did my best to tune them out. It irritated me that no one was willing to talk to me, but they were more than happy to talk about me. But I wasn't going to make a scene by confronting them in my very first class. That would just give them even more to talk about. It would be better if they lost interest, and I could fade into the background. Our teacher was a very pregnant woman in her late 20s. She completely ignored all of the students who were talking in favor of playing a game on her cell phone. Whatever. It's not like we were expected to learn anything in homeroom anyway. I stared down at my notebook and tried to pretend that I wasn't incredibly uncomfortable sitting here by myself. I reached out for Cannon with our pack bond, but his homeroom must have been too far. I couldn't sense him at all. My mother had been half human and unable to shift from her human form, so I had inherited some of her weaknesses. I could shift into my wolf form, and I had enough magic to be included in the pack bond, but I would always be one of the lowest wolves out there. Those more powerful than myself had an easier time shifting, and could do it as often as they liked. I sometimes struggled to reach the tiny spark inside that would allow me to shift, and had gotten stuck in one form or the other more than a few times. Cannon was one of the wolves that I had met when I came to Hollow Crest after escaping from my old pack. Corey, Grayson, and Wyatt had already graduated from high school and were a few years older than Cannon and I. They had left California and had settled here in Hollow Crest just a short time before I had arrived. The four of them had started a mechanic shop, Four Guys Auto, which is where the other 3 members of our pack currently were. Lucky them. I wish I was anywhere but here right now. Our pregnant teacher struggled to her feet and held up a hand to speak. Her words were completely drowned out by the jumble of excited students becoming reacquainted with their friends. "Hey!" A tall blonde guy got to his feet and let out a loud whistle, which got the attention of everyone in the room. "Mrs. Myers is trying to talk," he shouted over the din in a deep voice. Mrs. Myers smoothed her dress over her protruding belly. "Thank you, Noah," she said quietly. "I need everyone to take a seat so I can take roll before the announcements start." Roll call was just as boring as it was in my old school. It sucked that I was in front of the room, so I couldn't see everyone as they answered to their name unless I were to turn around and stare like a weirdo. It would have been nice to learn the names of some of the other students, so I had a chance to get to know people. I kept my head down and avoided eye contact until it was my turn to answer to my name. I heard some shuffling and a whispered, "That's her," but I couldn't make out who said it. I was surprised that this school didn't do announcements over the loudspeaker as I had expected. Instead, there was a television in the front corner of the room. We had to watch a couple of students recap the daily news before the principal stepped in to give a standard welcome speech. Boring. Finally, the bell rang, and I hurried to my first real class of the day. I already had my books in hand, and I wanted to be one of the first students there so that I could get a decent seat this time. A handful of students had beat me to my French class, but I gave a sigh of relief when I saw a desk in the back corner that was perfect for me. I slid into the seat and was surprised when the blonde guy from earlier deliberately sat right next to me. "Hey," he said with a friendly grin. "You're Lorraine?" "Just Lori," I murmured in surprise. "I'm Noah," he said with a small wave. "You must have just moved here. I've never seen you before." The classroom was slowly filling with students, but there was no sign of the teacher yet. I looked out the corner of my eye at Noah, trying not to be too obvious. He was just as tall as Cannon, but with more muscle on his frame. His square jaw, bright blue eyes, and close-cropped blonde hair screamed All-American to me. I wouldn't be surprised to find out that he was the stereotypical high school quarterback. I decided I would do my best to be friendly. Noah was the first person to speak to me, so maybe I could make at least one new friend today. "Yeah, I came out here originally to go to a summer program at Hollow Crest University, but decided to move here for my last year of high school." Noah's eyebrows rose. "No one just moves out here. What do your parents do?" I chewed on my lip nervously. My parents both passed away, but I'm 18, so I'm fine on my own." Great. I was already demonstrating that I wasn't a normal student. I had wanted to blend in, but I was just telling him all the things that made me different from the rest of them. "I'm sorry to hear that," Noah said sympathetically. "It must be hard being on your own." I nodded. I thought it would help to go somewhere completely new, somewhere there weren't memories lurking around every corner. And now I just made myself sound depressed. Fantastic. It only took a few seconds for me to build the type of reputation that I didn't want. Noah nodded, but before he could speak again, our teacher glided into the room. "Good morning, class," she said enthusiastically. "Don't think I'm going to be easy on you because this is your first period of the day. I expect every one of you to be on time and ready to learn when you walk into my classroom." There were a few groans around the room at her words, but I was surprised to hear a little bit of a Spanish accent behind her words. That was really impressive if she could speak 3 languages well enough to teach them. My last teacher had been a native French speaker who sometimes struggled with English, which could make classes interesting. It was great for learning the accent and immersing yourself in the language, but not so great when the teacher banned any English words from the classroom, and I couldn't figure out how to say something in French. She looked around the room, and my heart sank when her eyes settled on me. "I'm familiar with all of you, except our newest student." I turned bright red when everyone in the classroom turned to stare. "Lorraine?" "I go by Lori," I told her with a nervous smile. She nodded. "Lori, why don't you come to the front of the room so I can see what level you're on?" I tried to project confidence as I walked up to the front of the room, but being tested on my first day in front of the entire class was not my idea of fun. I hoped I retained enough from last year to avoid looking like an idiot. The last thing I wanted was for her to kick me out of the class for being too far behind everyone else. "Why don't we start by introducing ourselves and then going into a light conversation?" she asked with a warm smile. Internally, I heaved a sigh while pasting a strained smile on my face. "Sounds good." I crossed my fingers behind my back and hoped I didn't make a fool of myself. "Je me présente," she started. "Je m'appelle Madame Gonzalez." I breathed a sigh of relief when the French started coming back to me. "Je suis très heureuse de faire votre connaissance. Je m'appelle Lori." Her Spanish accent made some of the words sound a little different from what I was used to, but I could understand most of what she was saying. We conversed for about 10 minutes in front of the class, and I felt myself relax. She only asked general questions that weren't too personal, like what my favorite color was and what I had studied last year. I was grateful for that, because I had already given Noah way too much info. I kept focused on Mrs. Gonzalez's friendly face and warm smile while I tried to ignore the stares of the students watching us. Finally, she sent me back to my seat. "Your accent is very well developed, and your vocabulary is quite expansive," she said with a pleased smile. "You're probably going to be my best student this year." I blushed again at the praise and murmured a merci, but I could tell that her compliments hadn't made me any friends in the class. Noah looked impressed, but a couple of girls toward the front of the room shot me dirty looks. Mrs. Gonzalez asked us to open our books as she talked about her general plan for the year as I settled back in my chair. I was grateful to be out of the spotlight now that the students were focused on the teacher instead of me. I was writing the exam dates down in my notebook when Noah tossed me a note. "Hey, you seem like a cool girl. Can I get your number?" Once I puzzled out his messy chicken scratch, I looked over at him in surprise. He raised an eyebrow at me hopefully. I shook my head slightly and wrote beneath his note, "Sorry, I have a boyfriend." That seemed like a much easier explanation than trying to tell him about the pack situation that I was living in. Humans would never understand. Plus, I thought that Cannon might be interested in being my boyfriend, so it wasn't a complete lie. Probably. Well, maybe. I waited until Mrs. Gonzalez turned her back to write something on the board before I tossed the note back to Noah. He looked disappointed at the response, but didn't try to pass me any more notes. After class was over, he gave me a friendly nod, but went over and slapped one of his buddies on the back, otherwise ignoring me. So I guess my one lame attempt at making a friend had failed. My next couple of classes went by less eventfully. None of the other teachers called me to the front or even acknowledged me in particular. They just handed out textbooks and went over the class syllabus. I tried to make eye contact and smile at a couple of girls who looked like they might be nice, but they pretty much ignored me. I gave up after that and just kept my head down. Hopefully, things would get better once the workload of the semester picked up. Today, none of the teachers had even tried to keep the attention of the students long. They had just handed out a syllabus and textbooks while everyone socialized. I had sat there awkwardly by myself as everyone talked around me and doodled in my notebook, trying to pretend that it didn't bother me. Finally, it was lunchtime, and I walked eagerly to the cafeteria. Cannon was the one beacon of hope for me in the sea of misery I had found myself in today. I followed the wave of students through the doors and stood on my tiptoes to try and spot Cannon through the crowd. I frowned when I didn't see his tall frame and reached out with our pack bond. The guys and I had discovered that I couldn't use the bond at the same distances that they could, probably because I had significantly less magic. Cannon wasn't close enough for me to sense, so I looked around the cafeteria for somewhere for us to sit. I might as well save us a spot, since I was here early. I scanned the room, but there were no empty tables. Great. Yet another example of how I was a misfit. I quickly discounted the tables that were obviously the jocks and the popular girls. Same with the emo and drama kids. I wouldn't fit in there with my plain jeans and thrift shop t-shirt. My eyes caught on a petite Asian girl sitting alone at a table while she read a book. That seemed promising. She had her dark hair in a messy bun and big glasses that looked like they were about to slide off the tip of her nose at any moment. She was dressed similarly to me, in plain jeans and a t-shirt, so I thought I might have a chance at making friends with her. I walked over to her and cleared my throat nervously. "Hey, do you mind if I sit here?" "Fine," she said without looking up from her book. "Just don't talk to me." I sighed and set down my stuff before sitting. I guess we weren't going to be friends then. I perked up when I felt Cannon's presence pop into my awareness. I gave him a big hug when he walked up to the table, and he rubbed my back reassuringly. "I'm guessing it wasn't a good day?" I gave him one last squeeze before I let him go. "It wasn't great. How did things go for you?" Cannon gave me a big grin. "I tested out of my computer class. I'm going to get to do an independent study instead." "Wow, Cannon, that's awesome!" The girl sitting across from us gave me a dirty look, so I guess we weren't supposed to talk too loud, even if we weren't talking to her. "Hey, I'm Cannon," he said with a friendly grin towards our new table mate. "Lynn," she grumbled as she pushed her glasses up the bridge of her nose. They quickly slid right back down, but she ignored that and kept her eyes on her book. "She said I could sit here if I didn't try to talk to her," I told Cannon with our bond. He gave me an incredulous look, and I just shrugged. I wasn't the one making no-talking rules. Cannon and I chatted about our day, and apparently things had gone better for him than me. People had actually been willing to speak to him. That shouldn't have surprised me, because Cannon was so open and easygoing. It did make me sad that there was something so wrong with me that people wouldn't give me a chance. Cannon must have picked up on my thoughts, because he gave me a shoulder bump as we finished our lunches. "We're the strangers here," he said quietly. "We need to make the effort to fit in. Put ourselves out there." I sighed sadly. "You're right. I could probably try smiling a little more." I did feel a little better once I realized that my next 2 classes were going to be with Cannon. The afternoon would definitely be more fun than this morning. Lynn sat down her book with an irritated huff. "I'll give you some advice. Don't try to fit in. Do whatever you can to get out of this town." I looked at her in surprise. "What makes you say that?" She held my gaze steadily. "There's a lot that goes on here that you don't want to know about. The best thing to do is just keep to yourself and bide your time. As soon as I graduate, I'm getting out." Cannon furrowed his brow. "What is it that we have to worry about?" Lynn avoided our eyes and played with the corner of her book. "You'll find out soon enough," she mumbled. Cannon and I exchanged glances. This was definitely weird. The bell rang to announce that our lunch period was over, and Lynn scurried away before we could ask her any more questions. "Do you want to stop at our lockers, then meet in the stairwell?" I asked Cannon. "Sounds good." He gave me a warm smile, but I doubted he was as grateful as I was that our next few classes were together. We gathered up our belongings and made our way through the crowd, our pinkies linked together. Just having Cannon nearby gave me a sense of comfort and belonging that I had been craving all day. It made me realize that Cannon and I were a pack in the true sense of the word. No matter what happened, we would always stand by each other. Chapter 2. Lori. My last class of the day was gym, which worked out perfectly for me. After I got all sweaty and disgusting, I could just go home instead of debating between the horrors of public showering versus the unpleasantness of being stinky the rest of the school day. I was annoyed that our teacher had made us change today without any reason. He had just taken roll, talked for about 10 minutes, and then left us to do whatever we wanted in the gym for the rest of the period. I took Cannon's advice and tried to smile at a couple of other girls, but they avoided eye contact and ignored me. Lynn was in my class, but she had taken a seat high on the bleachers and buried her nose in a book. I debated on trying to talk to her again, but when I got up to climb the bleachers towards where she was sitting, she shot me a warning look. Guess I was on my own again today. I cracked open my history book and started on the reading that the teacher had assigned to us. I might as well finish this now, so I had nothing but free time the rest of the day. Taylor was also in the class with us. She was surrounded by a group of girls that were just as pretty and well-dressed as she was. I tried to hide a smile when I realized that they reminded me of the plastics from Mean Girls. Tiffany seemed like the leader, with her perfectly styled blonde hair and clothing tailored to match her high-end sneakers. Brittany and Lacey looked like her clones, but with dark blonde and brunette hair instead of bleached blonde. I don't know what I did to attract their attention, but I soon realized that they were whispering and shooting glares in my direction. That was just as annoying. It was one thing to ignore the new girl, another for them to gossip about me, but a whole new level for them to speak maliciously about me, especially since Taylor and I had been friendly in the past. I glanced down at the oversized t-shirt that Cannon had lent me, my battered sneakers from the thrift shop, and my loose shorts from Walmart. I could guess what they were snickering about. I found out that I was right when Tiffany tossed a balled-up piece of paper at me. "Oh, I thought that was the trash can," she called out as I brushed the paper aside. Half the students in the class laughed right alongside them, and my face flushed red. "Do you need glasses?" I snapped back at her. "Or are you just being a bitch for no reason?" There was complete silence. Tiffany stood up slowly, her face turning red. Taylor stayed seated, but the other two sidekicks flanked Tiffany. "What did you just say to me?" she demanded. I stood up. "Do you also need a hearing aid along with your glasses?" "Oh, burn," one of the guys snickered. Tiffany narrowed her eyes on me, and I realized that I had just made her into an enemy. She considered herself to be the top bitch here, and I had challenged her authority. She wouldn't be able to stop until she proved her dominance over me. But I wasn't willing to back down. I had spent my entire life at the bottom of my pack, cowering and hiding from the alphas. That part of my life was over. I wasn't going to let anyone treat me like that again, especially not a human high school girl. The door to the gym banged open, but Tiffany and I didn't take our eyes off each other. "Watch yourself," she said softly. "This isn't over." Our gym teacher frowned when he saw the awkward standoff we were in, but Tiffany flashed a smile at him and sat back down with her cronies. The rest of the class went back to their conversations now that the show was over, and the teacher just shrugged. I got the impression that he would rather not know what was going on. Fine with me. The bell finally rang an excruciating half-hour later, signaling the end of my last class of the day. I jumped up out of my seat and rushed back toward the locker room to grab the rest of my stuff. The rest of the students weren't really in a rush to go anywhere, so I was the first one in. I got a few strange looks, but no one said anything to me. At first, I had been hurt at the way the other students were ignoring me. Then I was sad and felt sorry for myself. But by the end of this class, my temper...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?